It's fine. It's fine. No, really. It's fine. It's fine. Outstanding. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Cobra Eagle, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I predominantly play Planet Zoo, and we're going to be starting live streams of Planet Zoo on YouTube here very soon. I wanted to take the opportunity to run you guys through my current zoo so you can see kind of where we're at and then see how we progress from there. This way it also alleviates the need to kind of go through every time that we have a new viewer who's interested in it, because then there's at least a zoo or a video there that people can then take a look at. So let's go ahead and we'll get into the zoo. I have been playing on franchise mode, which makes dealing with research significantly easier, in my opinion. So here's our current zoo. You can see we're doing pretty okay with cash. Grasslands, it is in Asia. We only have about 67 animals and about 2,500 guests. They're not super happy, and we'll see why when we get in here. So let's go ahead and resume, and then we'll immediately pause it. It is nighttime, but I think it should still be pretty effective to take a look at this. We'll leave the light off for now unless there's areas that we feel are entirely too dark, and then we'll go from there. So one of the main design goals with this zoo was to push myself creatively, as well as make sure that whenever I had a habitat barrier of some kind, that I didn't just use the traditional barriers that the game gives and just put a line around and call it a day. I have about 800 hours in the game, and I wanted to make sure that we had, or that I demonstrated in this, all of the different things that I've learned over that 800 hours. As you saw in the intro, things started out a little rough, very basic, just kind of square buildings, and we move on to kind of what we've got going on here. And there will still be some square elements, but there's a lot more detail, a lot more emphasis in making sure that the building looks more like a legitimate building than just simply putting 4 walls and a top around it. One of the other big things that we can take into consideration now is when we look at any of the staff rooms, we have this scenery rating, which I believe was introduced in 1.2, which does make it that doing loads of scenery is very valuable instead of just simply placing an object that has a negative radius far enough away from the guests. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Whenever I start a zoo, I usually create a support facility of some kind that has all of the standard buildings with a keeper hut, research facilities, workshops, quarantines, trading center, and all of that kind of stuff. I also took the opportunity to go ahead and put an information center right here because, at least in my world, typically you have an information center right at the beginning. Now, I don't normally do this where you can see all the guests congregating here, but it's not so packed that it's that big of a deal. But I normally, and you'll see with most of the shops later, that I don't let the guests typically line up inside the main path. There's usually a little 4-meter path segment that the object is away from the path, so the guests can queue up there instead of queuing up directly in the pathway. Bathrooms are a slightly different story, or toilets, because the guests just cycle in and cycle out. Now, they can line up if there are guests inside, but they don't take very long to move in and out, so usually you don't really have a queuing problem there. After we built this building, which actually ended up growing to have multiple levels over time, we even have a second keeper hut in here. Down through the trees and around here, we have another keeper hut down here that services our very first habitat that we built. When this habitat was originally built, those look like porcelain dolls, sorry. When we originally built this habitat, we were working on the released Chinese animals, I believe, and so pandas, like the red panda and the giant pandas, were the two main things that I put in here. I think it was just breed, at any rate. So that's part of why we started out with those animals. But we have the habitat here. Obviously, the keeper can come in and do everything that they need to do. Not a big deal. The nice thing about the red pandas is they let you have as much coverage as you want, and there is a little bit of stuff that you'll see later that's kind of touching inside, but it makes that 99%. Overall, our animal's still extremely happy, so that 1 percentage point I am not concerned about, because it causes me to have to move the plants that I put elsewhere to a place that I really don't like, because it makes it look unrealistic. Now, these climbing frames are the base game climbing frames. I did just kind of plop them in here just to make my life a little bit easier when we originally did this. And as we see here, we are sticking with the theme of covering or having the barrier made up of entirely just standard building materials. And so over here, as we start kind of getting more of a curved shape, it's just a single wall that is curved, and each of those is a separate individual building. On top of that, because these animals are pretty sensitive to guests being around them with the stress, we have not only the do not disturb signs, but we also did put a little bit of the glass up that helps, or the one-way glass that helps keep the animals feeling a little bit more private. And so that is not necessarily part of the habitat barrier. And then we had a little bit of an experiment over here where we went ahead and we did put in a pane of the glass here that you can see through. And it's on the other side of an education board, so it's not really that noticeable. But I didn't want to just line the entire thing with that. I haven't really had stress issues with these animals. The only issues that I've really had with these animals right now is occasionally when you load into the game, it's forgets to calculate that there's climbable area, and so the animal's social well-being will drop, and it'll drop with their space, and then you go to space and then their climbing is down at 0. It happens with a couple of different climbing animals that require climbing, and so it's a little frustrating, but nevertheless, that's just kind of what we're dealing with. The education boards are also just made out of custom pieces, so instead of just taking the standard little education blueprint that they have, or nope, not that. I don't even know where it is. There. Instead of just taking this and plopping it down and putting a frame on it, we went ahead and built out all of that and made it generally nicer. There's other ones that I have that have like light and those kind of things, and we'll see those as we continue through. So initially when I built this habitat as well, one of the other things that was kind of a big concern was the guests were complaining that they couldn't really see. That's not what I wanted to click. They couldn't really see the animal. I was getting a lot of this. I suppose it's fine, and that was generally higher up. Now that we have more of this built out and the guests can go all the way around, they're generally happier. One of the other things that I like to try to do, if possible, and it's not something I've done 100% of the time, but I do definitely like to do that if we can, is make it that the guests can be technically inside the habitat whenever the opportunity presents itself. So we created this little like walled in kind of building area here, and then the guests can kind of be in here as a viewing area. It lets them be inside a little bit, give them a little bit more of a view around to potentially see the animals, because you really can't have a whole lot of them in here anyway. And then they also get all giddy because they get to be inside the habitat instead of instead of being just standing on the perimeter of the habitat. So that animal, we're moving on. The other design goal that I had with this is often whenever I build zoos, I have a really bad habit of creating a space like this that would be open and then just never really decorating it. So the goal was that as I built the zoo, I would decorate all the way around. Since this is grassland, I try to focus mostly on grassland type plants. Grassland in Asia, there's really only about 4 plants. It gets pretty old pretty quick. So I went ahead and just expanded it to grassland in general. And then if we are around an animal that has a particular requirement, like the giant panda, if we go ahead and take a look here, that their biome is temperate, I'll mix in or use predominantly just temperate around the edge instead as part of the decorations, because if it's touching the barrier for this habitat, then the game will trigger that and make it that the animals are not quite as happy as we saw with the red pandas already. So we don't have any of that issue here. All of the plants all the way around, which are a lot. We have 80% coverage, which is probably one of the highest I've ever had. Not a single plant is something that they dislike. So we come over here, we can click this, we can see everybody gets a really, really good view of the pandas. Part of the reason that they get such a good view is there are a number of animals in here. I believe I have upwards of 10 pandas in here. 9. So I have 9 pandas in here. Some of them are going to need to be rehomed at this point because I haven't really done a whole lot of the management. But what the other thing that really works out with this one is, much like I did with the panda habitat, or the red panda habitat, sorry, I'm getting myself all tongue twisted, is there is a bridge here that will bring the animals, or bring the guests inside of the habitat. So the guests just love to stand on this bridge and look over, and they get really, really good views, especially because they're up above. And then on top of that, the animals can obviously be over here, and they can be down in this area. These animals are also a little bit sensitive to stress, so there are places where they can hide. They can get into the water here and just kind of chill out there. There's also a little cave that I built here, and then even their shelter as a whole, which is a pretty kind of basic shelter, but it was still handcrafted, which is another design goal, is to craft as many of the things by hand as we can. The only real difference are those couple of climbing frames, but everything else is predominantly built just strictly by me building it, instead of trying to just take the elements that are already put into the game and just plopping them down. It's a lot more fun for me to build it myself. Even here, you can see along this bridge, this fence, while I could have just used the fence that comes along with this, I wanted to go ahead and create my own, so I created my own. And then I had to use some of these pillars and whatnot to kind of make sure that the animals couldn't get up around these corners. Not too big of a deal. It was actually fairly easy, but nevertheless. So by letting the guests get into the habitat here, it is an extremely useful tool because the guests really, really love it and tend to spend a lot more time. And whenever they're happy about the view, they are more willing to donate money. We even added elements like this bridge here, which is a completely custom built bridge. Added lights to it, and then we had this little boat, and so we went ahead and made that like it was kind of wrecked in the water here, so not a big deal. But moving on from here, we also then created a food court kind of pavilion, and then over here we have the opportunity for the staff to go ahead and, or not staff, but the guests to go ahead and get food and drink. And then there is a staff room hidden right back here. And because of that negative radius thing that we get to work with, it is so small that the ring doesn't even come out to the front of the building. You can see just a little sliver of it right there. It's really, really amazing whenever you get this down to this level. The other thing is, and keen eyes may have seen it already, but we do have this little path here, and then this does provide us with some utility buildings that are kind of buried back out of the way, definitely covered with a lot of foliage. And then same thing we have over here. I wanted to make sure that this area here was also an area that the guests hopefully wouldn't just stand around and look out at animals that we might put back here. So I went ahead and put a lot of foliage here to kind of give this more of like a closed-in feel. Another technique that I've done in this is this entire building is actually just raised up a little bit. So you can see the path that we've got going on down here is just your normal regular path. The guests will walk on it. But if you bring a tileable floor, or even just objects that you create your own tile with, like if I wanted to just use these boards or something like that, I could bring that up just enough that you can make it cover the path like it is. And now it looks like a stone path, which is obviously not one of the normal paths that you get, instead of it being just whatever the normal path material is. So it's really kind of nice to do that. The thing that you do have to be a little bit kind of mindful of is you can see that the path is just a little bit above. So the guest's feet will clip through that just a little bit, but it's so small and minute that you don't really notice it. Moving on to our next habitat, and it is a little dark there. We did build a multi-habitat or multi-species enclosure here that took into account the kangaroo and koala, which can share the same space. Now, the trick with this is that the guests can be in the habitat with the koala, but they cannot be in habitat with a kangaroo. And so when we look at this particular habitat, this entire habitat here is actually quite large. And we'll go to the heat map or whatever it is that shows all of this stuff. I think it's the staff room things. So you can just see how many of these things are. We'll do that here in just a minute. But you can see that the barrier overall is all the way around here. And then what I've done is, using the objects of the game here, I created my own little fence that separated the two sections out. And now the koala can still get to the other side. And they can't get to the other side through the fence, but they can get to the other side over this pathway here. And you can see that they use it a lot to come over here and hang out. And so they will be in the path with the guests and everything, which is exactly what we wanted. One of the biggest challenges that this particular thing presented, not only beyond the animal that can be and animal that can't be in with the animal, or the animal, or let me just say that again. One of the biggest challenges that we have here is that guests can only be in the habitat with the koala, but not with the kangaroo. And so we had that concern. But then the other thing that we have to take into consideration is, whenever you do something like this, where can your keeper go? So your keeper is still limited to the traversable area of your animals for all intents and purposes. So my keeper should be able to walk up in here because my animals can get up in there. But because none of the animals, koala or kangaroo, can walk across this, the keeper can't get across it. And so what I had to do in this particular one is I had to make sure that any feeding stations or anything that the keeper actually had to no kidding interact with wasn't over here. The other nice thing is, obviously, the animals will go to the bathroom in the game. The animals are able to, or will not, go to the bathroom in an area where the keeper can't get. So you can actually create areas that are high, that, for climbing purposes and so on and so forth, for your primates or your whatever, that would generally be inaccessible by a keeper. However, it does allow the animals to still be in there. They just won't use the bathroom over there, and it works out great. The other big challenge, and that was, I think, what I was trying to say before, the other big challenge is these animals have different biomes that they are indigenous to. And so we have grassland and desert, which is what this is. So Oceania, grassland, desert, which would have been a pretty good fit. But then the koala is more of tropical temperate. And so we had to find plants that kind of bridge that gap. All the plants in here bridge that gap, but it was a little bit of a challenge to try to find which ones would and wouldn't work in order to make it all the way that we needed to. So this all still ended up turning out extremely nice. And again, we have custom frames. They're still pretty not boring, but basic. But we did put a little light down here just to kind of help light the path. And then we also have been trying to make extensive use of coloring the donation bins or anything else that is colorable, as long as it makes sense or fits with the theme. Because there are some things that, I can change color on, and I'll change the color, but it's only if it's really kind of worthwhile to change the color. So we have this walkthrough path here. This puts the guests inside the habitat. So the guests are still in the habitat. They're really only in the habitat with a koala, and they can see the kangaroo, but it still kind of hits that same effect. And as you can see, just with that one donation bin, we're hitting like $2,000, and we're in September. Generally, you can get a good view of the red kangaroo from here. The guests are really happy generally with this habitat, so it's pretty nice. Keep in mind, too, that I started building this zoo around the time that 1.3 came out, so I went ahead and started tossing in some vending machines. And you can see here that just because it's at nighttime, these things are extremely bright, and it's just kind of blown out, but at any rate, so we have the vending machines that are just kind of tossed around here or there just as something to do. And then we also have the ATMs that we're throwing around just to make sure that the guests have access to money. Now, in order to service this particular habitat, I didn't want the keeper to have to come all the way from over here, so I went ahead and built another staff facility, and we made this more of like an Australia-ish kind of zone. So we have just another general basic kind of structure here. We do have our power and water facilities here. They're still generally kind of hidden. It's not as hidden as before, but they are still kind of pushed back far enough that it's not too big of a deal. If we take a look at the negative radius, you can see that it doesn't come out very far. The other thing we did is we also covered the staff floor with the tiling down here, which made this look a lot nicer because, again, now we have a completely different path. It is a staff path under there. You can probably see just a little bit of it right here, but overall it works out extremely well. Very happy, and I could always have put some sort of like piece of wood trim or something like that there to cover that little bit up if I wanted to. That particular structure also services not only the koala and kangaroo, but also the southern cassowary, I think is what they're called. I call them like ugly black turkeys because they are pretty hideous. We'll turn the light on here just so you can kind of see, but they are pretty kind of gross looking in my opinion, but the babies are really cute, so we'll let them stay. But at any rate, they didn't require a lot of space. We went ahead and gave them a little bit of water to kind of work with, and then they also can climb up here. And again, we're still sticking to that same theme where we have a custom built barrier instead of using the predetermined barrier stuff that the game gives us. It's not that there's anything wrong with those, but oftentimes you just can't get as creative because you're literally just kind of drawing a line all the way around. So this ends up working out really, really well, and you can create some really kind of unique structures and everything else by doing that. So again, we used a lot of the same decorative stuff on the inside as we did on the outside. We again created our own custom frames here, and this time I went ahead and tried to do it a little bit more like I'm used to seeing when I go to zoos, where it might be canted towards you in a way, and maybe down so you can kind of look down on a board. And then also gave it kind of like a sun shield to help reduce any glare that might actually happen. And then we even put a light up in there. And then we just kind of repeated that same thing all the way around. And then the donation bins here are of the same color. It's the blue and black. We did actually put the orange in there, but that was just entirely too hideous, so we had to move on. And you can see coming back around, it puts us back over by our red pandas. And so all of this is pretty well connected. Now, as we come over to the other side of the red pandas, one of the things, and this is where the plants that are making the red pandas mad by dropping it from the 100 to 99 is from here, because there's one of the bushes that's over on top of this stuff that is like pushing into the edge, so it gets a little bit mad about that. But other than that, everything works out well. And so I wanted to create like a little kind of walkthrough area that was covered with a variety of different foliage and stuff like that, and then still have kind of like a viewing area for our guests to see our red pandas. So we have this, we even have some light up in here, and it brings the guests all the way over to here where the path splits. And we're still looking at our red pandas over here. When we come in here, we have the Chinese pangolin, and the Chinese pangolin is an animal that you can have the guests in, so that's why we just have the traditional walk-in gate. I do wish we could do something a little bit more customizable than these, and there are a few ways to do it, but then your guests just literally like walk through the object, and that isn't something that I really like, so I try to avoid that as best I can. We use the same frames that we did for the red pandas, but ultimately the Chinese pangolin have a decent amount of area here, and they can go pretty far back, and so the guests don't end up finding this one too fun to be in, just simply because there is a lot of space where the pangolin can hide. But they really like it. Most of the time I'm getting negative reviews, but part of the reason why I wanted to make this larger where the animal can get away is they are also very sensitive to stress, and I wanted to make sure that they had places to go where the guests couldn't see them. So coming up this path here real quick, this is that same kind of support facility, or same exact support facility that we looked at before. And then there's this keeper hut that we did add in at one point later on. And it was just basically to make sure that we had a way for the keeper hut We didn't have to do anything else special for the keeper hut that's currently down here, because I think it's right under this, to connect up. But then it also made it that the building can only have one keeper, specifically is designed to take care of just the Chinese pangolin as well. So it works out really, really well. I also wanted to do something a little bit different down here and created almost like a hard shelter with the glass and kind of wood. And you'll see another area where we did this to a much larger extent, and it fits pretty well with the overall theme of that particular habitat. So we're going to come out here, and that looks like litter. So our caretakers aren't doing what they should. One thing I mentioned that we were going to take a look at was the staff's areas. So let's go ahead and take a look at not so much the work zone, so we'll just create a new work zone, but just taking a look at the overall zoo, you can see like these are the handful of habitats that we've looked at so far. So here's our Chinese pangolin, here's our red panda, here's our southern cassowary, here's our, I call it down under, so it's the kangaroo and the koala, and then here's our giant panda. We also have the gharial in this habitat here. We have dingoes in this habitat. We have the Aldeburgh giant tortoise over here, and then we also have snow leopards here. As we continue to go through this, we'll see all of these different environments and just see what we've created, and so it should be pretty fun. So now we came out this side here. We're going to just go ahead and double back down this path and come at this from the other direction. And I do kind of like to fly through the zoo sometimes in the perspective of the guests. So I'll actually put it in the first-person camera. Now, this particular structure isn't 100% complete. The building overall is complete, but there are still some shops and whatnot that I needed to put in here. I haven't put in any merchandise shops yet, so I think I am going to put like 2 merchandise shops. It did dawn on me, I think, literally last night after I've been playing this zoo for like 3 months, that I should probably put in another information center, which will get put in here. And then maybe because thirst is still a little bit or a lot of a problem, we'll just put in another drink stand in here just to kind of help the guests. Now, just cramming a whole bunch in the same spot doesn't do you a whole lot of good. You do definitely have to spread them out, and you'll see how I'm starting to kind of spread them out a little bit more. Unfortunately, at the beginning of the zoo, I didn't prioritize building these things, and so now I'd have to go in and carve out space that animals are already using or something like that. So we're just going to go ahead and leave it as is, and we're going to try to use this and just kind of overcome this particular problem. They also have some staff rooms, and then we have some custom built planters in here, as well as condiment stations and trash bins across the way here, and same over here. And then this is just kind of a walkthrough thing. We have a restroom here as well, and I try to even change the colors of the restroom tiles to kind of fit with the theme that I'm going for. We have a custom education board here to try to get some of that stuff up. I probably need to start putting some more of that in here. I guess we can fix this while we're here and we saw it. And I have put a lot of cameras down for crime and whatnot, but clearly it's still not doing entirely too good of a job. All right, so now we're over at our dingoes, which we have on the left, and then our gharial, which we have on the right. So we'll take a look at the gharial first. The gharial requires water, and I didn't have a water pump that was sufficient for this area, so I went ahead and put a water pump here, and then obviously we needed power, and then I went ahead and put a keeper hut back here. This keeper hut is probably overused because I have it servicing this habitat and the dingo habitat, and then the nearest staff room is actually the staff rooms that are over in that like that large kind of food court area. So the staff management component in this area probably isn't so good, but so far I haven't really got any complaints since I finally took all the time to do the staff management stuff, and it should make it relatively decent. This entire bridge is custom as well, and I actually took a lot of time to build all of these different little things, and then these little pot lights here are just like your standard little like angled light that I tried to get flat on this surface here just to create some light along that path, and then used a variety of the other things with the chains that came from the classic set, these concrete kind of pillars that come from the New World set, and everything else to kind of create this. Again, the barrier here, the barrier on this side is really just a matter of that the animals can't climb that sharp of an edge. There's even just a little bit of a water thing here. Yep. A little bit of a water thing where the water can kind of come up underneath here. The animals shouldn't be able to get up underneath that. Now, I don't have any babies in here yet, so I don't know for sure if the animals can get out or not, but that's something that we'll just have to see whenever they actually give birth to an animal. This whole wall here is just a couple of Indian pieces and then a glass piece in the middle there that creates the barrier on this side. And we extended that all the way along to here up to the keeper door. And then from here, and you can see again, the guests are just absolutely cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs in here, in that there is so many guests standing in this area, especially down here. It is just straight ridiculous. But again, it's because the guests get to cross this barrier and effectively be in the habitat with the animal. On this side, we created another fence-like thing, very similar to what we had done before. It's just a couple of decorative items, and we put a little board on top of it to keep the animals in there. And then the frame here is pretty standard. We just took a couple pieces, or actually just kind of attached it to the fencing and then put the one of the Indian frame pieces around it. So that is one of the times that I did kind of take the easier route and do it that way. No particular reason other than just I felt that it fit with this particular environment. So when we take a look at this habitat, nothing super crazy, but I did want to kind of create a couple of different places where the animals could kind of get in and out of another pool of water that's down here. And then down in this water, you can see that it's lit, and then there's also glass. So the guests can theoretically stand up there and look over. It's not really likely that they do that too much, but it's still there. The other thing is we have obviously the path that is along here that has, the standard little edge that it has. But I wanted to make sure that it was something that had a nicer edge along it. So we took a lot of the I believe these are like the Indian kind of sandstone pillars, and then went ahead and created an edge on here that works for what we need. Coming up, you can see that we just have, these are sandstone pillars here that are also doing that, and they feed into here, and then glass panes, and then we just went ahead and added a little bit of decorative stuff as well. Overall, another very successful habitat. The guests really, really like it. Now, the next thing I wanted to do was I wanted to incorporate a track ride of some kind. I've always wanted to use the rides, but just never really spent a lot of time messing with them. So I decided to go ahead and put more effort into doing that this time. And then I got, at least I think, fairly creative in how this kind of played out. So if a guest comes in here, and right now all the guests got kicked out because whenever you start the game, for whatever reason, it closes the ride, kicks them out, and then it has to start everything back over. Actually, the ride's closed, so let's go ahead and open it. But when the guests get to do this, they come through here, which they're currently in the dingo habitat. Now they're not. Now we have this tunnel here. We can go ahead and let it play and let our torches go. And then they'll come through, and then here they enter into the snow leopard habitat. And we'll see how this is all kind of connected. You can see there's a little cave back there, and it looks like there's something. You can see a couple of the track rides there. And then we can also see some of the things that we've built over here, which we'll take a look at here in just a few minutes. As we continue on, there's a custom-built climbing frame. The snow leopard doesn't require climbing, but it was still kind of nice because it is kind of cool that sometimes the animals will be just sitting up here and laying literally on top of this. So I wanted to kind of maximize some opportunities for the animals to be close to where the guests would be while they're riding this track ride. We come around here, and now we're getting to a part of the zoo that hasn't really been worked on yet. And we come around, and we're going to enter another cave. And so this area here might be another area where we leave something open and put something in here, because above it, we're going to have a castle of some kind. And you'll see the start of that when we get up there. Now, as we come into this area where the track ride is, you'll see in here that we have some kind of storage stuff, looks like food and whatnot, but overall I really kind of wanted to give this more of like a prison or dungeon kind of feel. So this is more of like a dungeon for our castle that we are going to have up above us on the main level. So you can see that we have one of our snow leopards hiding here. I don't know if the guests really will like enjoy or not enjoy this, and I'm pretty confident we're going to get a couple of guests that are going to stand here on the exit path and just be gawking at the guests. So that's one of the things you have, not gawking at the guests, gawking at the animals. But that's one of the things you just have to kind of take into consideration when you do some of this kind of stuff, is that some of the mechanics, there's just nothing you can do to solve it other than, no, I think even if you put even a staff path in here, then the guests are technically, when they get off, they get trapped and they can't get out. So there's nothing else you can do here. While we're down here, we're going to take a look at this real quick. We also have water and power down here. So again, something that's relatively hidden away from our guests. And because of all of the structure stuff around here, the scenery rating of everything is basically at 100% all the way across the board. So I have another path that has torches, just like we had come through twice before. This gate brings us into the dingo habitat, which we sort of started in. And then this dingo habitat actually is pretty large when you look at it. Now, because they are canines, they do require a lot of space. So you can see here that we have 1,700 square meters is what they need, and we have 2,500 square meters. But when we look at the number of animals that are in this habitat, which we can take a look at here, there are 7. So that's quite a few, and they haven't even started reproducing yet, because I have the speed, I believe, on 5 times, so I can let the game play and still do some things without having to worry so much about the management, because building to this level of detail, at least for me, takes such a long time that I would just get completely distracted if I have to keep coming back and checking animals and then coming back again and then picking up where I left off, because I just really need to stay focused on what I'm doing. So unfortunately, I do let this be paused quite a bit whenever I'm playing normally or building stuff as I go. All right, so we have the track ride here. We had to put another gate here, and this gate isn't connected to the habitat barrier really. Well, I guess technically it is. One of them is and one of them isn't. But part of the problem is if you don't put something like this here, then the animals can walk in here and walk right out that way. And there are, again, you can put objects up to keep the animals from getting out, but then the guests are going to walk through them. So I experimented with a lot of different things, and I finally just said, forget it, and put up a like one of the airlock gates on the front side and another airlock gate on the back side to make sure that our animals couldn't get through there. So yeah, the barrier comes here. It'll come up to here, and then it goes across this, and it runs along this back wall here. I could have made it that it ran across here as well, and then like across the front. It wouldn't have mattered, because now all the animals are blocked in by the actual objects. So that was a different option. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it would have just been a matter of, is this in or out of the habitat? I don't know that that really matters so much. We did take some time to decorate in here too, and even put some little arrows kind of showing the direction that this station is going. And we have a lot of like foliage and stuff like that in here, because I don't think they actually care about how much foliage they have. Now, they are a grasslands animal, if I remember correctly. Yeah, desert and grasslands. But they don't care about the coverage, so that worked out really, really well. And so we can add a whole lot of coverage to this, which is really, really nice and tends to make your habitats look a lot nicer. All right, so we've covered all of this. We've covered up to this tunnel here. And so in this tunnel, there's a bridge above us, or not a bridge. Well, I guess it is technically a bridge, but there's a pathway above us. And we also worked in Hot Dog Squad and Gulpy to start trying to get some more restaurants and stuff like that in here. We're going to go back this direction, because we'll get to all that here in a few minutes. Hopefully. We're going to come back. We're going to go back through our cafeteria-like area. We can see a giant set of stairs over there that we're going to go up here in just a minute. If we look here to the left, there's the cassowary. To the right, we have a waterfall. And then also through here, we have a couple more education boards, and then we have a couple of exhibit animals back here. I don't make a whole lot of use of the exhibit animals, just simply because, I mean, they're good for kind of space filler, but they don't really draw in the giant crowds like you'll get with the snow leopards that have a 5,000 plus point appeal, and then you have to bump your price up quite a bit in order to keep the number of guests at a reasonable level. But this just connects back over here, but I still wanted to create kind of like this nice nature-y area. If we take a look at this, you can see like the waterfall coming down. And even here, I wanted to add something because it looked like somebody could kind of crawl across that. So I wanted to add something that maybe was intended to be a little bit of a barrier. So now we come over here. We're still kind of on a dingo habitat, up these stairs, dingo habitat. Again, the railings are custom. They're not the railings that come with the path itself. And now you can see, you can see here the top of the prison. So ultimately, kind of like right underneath this pathway is where the track ride comes in, and then this building here is where the entrance and exit are. So we'll go around to the other side here. We also have an ATM. I just finished decorating this the other day on one of my most recent, I believe, Twitch streams, and then also kind of decorated it all up in here. We have a staff room here, and again, this is the one thing that's super nice. You can see that this ring is so small that even though it is literally like right next to this, it doesn't even impact the guests, which is great. We also have a bathroom in here, hot dog squad and pip shot juice, and then we have the entrance and exit to our prison ride, or the safari ride down here. Again, I tried to make extensive use of the rust bars. It's probably one of like my favorite items right now to kind of work with. And then we have the overall structure here. This is all custom built by hand. And obviously it's still kind of symmetrical. So, I built like a couple sides and then went around and then copied and pasted, but it still kind of fit with the overall like look and feel of what I was going for. This was supposed to be a bonobo habitat, but that got wrecked because I decided to do something different. I mean, and I still have the opportunity to maybe create a path that comes down this way. I haven't tried it yet, but if I can create a path that maybe comes along this way, as long as there's not enough, or as long as there's not a negative radius thing here, but there is, so I'd have to snake it right by here. So it's just a matter of whether or not that would upset any guests, because that's the power and water that's down in the prison, and those are as small as they're going to get. So I might be able to do that, and it might be a good idea to do it. And even if I make a smaller path, I can probably still snake it around here. And so I'm not 100% done with this, but this is the water source for the waterfall. And then we're starting to kind of look at the exterior wall of the castle that we're slowly working on. Now, the thing about this particular castle is I want to make sure that it still incorporates shops, exhibits, habitats, all of those kind of things as a way to make the entire thing kind of interactive. But then, as one of my other streaming buddies made mention, in like zoos or amusement parks or something like that, typically there's a theme, or there's like one core thing that really kind of like draws guests in and draws your attention. And so he decided to make a castle from Sweden because that's where he's from. I decided to make a more of an Indian like castle that comes just because I really have decided that I like this Indian set, and I've been working on this. These particular wall sections are just literally that. It's just a couple of like wall pieces that I can then just duplicate, and then I can drag around and put wherever I want, like this. And then same thing, I have this as its own separate building as well. So I can drag and put this where I want it to be and get these right in the center, and that way I can have these kind of spaced relatively even across the entirety of the I'm trying to like talk and do things at the same time, and I can't do it. The entirety of the outer wall. And then, I can turn these angles pretty much whatever I want, and then I can just kind of cover up some of the like potential ugliness of it with something like this. Now, part of it is I'm trying to get this rotated in a way that will let me have the arrows in a direction that I want, but I don't know if I'm going to find that. And it's just so I can try to get it set right, and I might just have to do it more the old-fashioned way. But, I mean, right there, that's about center, and we would continue to like fuss with it a little bit until we got it kind of exactly where we wanted it. Or I could just grab one and place it perfectly, or I could just grab that and hit move, and then that would also work, because then as long as I get the height right, then I can move it around. But that's pretty decent. And so this is kind of the exterior wall of this. On the other side here, you can see obviously that we haven't really built anymore. And then here is some potential hard shelter that I plan to have for some other species that we'll put in here. These shops are kind of the same way. It's actually just like each wall piece has a shop kind of attached to it. Then because of the way that the like interlinked, you can see that the walls just kind of overlay one another without it being weird or crazy or whatever, and it worked out extremely well. And so it created that nice kind of curved shape. Now, this is the barrier stuff that I was talking about before, just the basic barrier. This was just literally a test. I'm going to hit T here for a second, because below this area here is the barrier or the habitat for the snow leopard. So this will be another challenge to kind of come into, because the snow leopard, even though they can't get up to this area, are going to consider this part of the terrain. Another thing to consider is that I have the snow leopards at their maximum amount of allowable foliage. So they only like 15% foliage, and I don't have any foliage up here. So I'm going to have to get a little bit creative here and, you know, maybe just put stuff on the different sides, or maybe I'll just put a little bit of water with some rocks, or even just take out a couple things down here so then I can put some stuff up here, because it'll still be inside that barrier, so it'll still count. It's a little bit frustrating that the barrier system only kind of works on like a two-dimensional plane. It doesn't really take into account the elevation that you might have and where the animal can and can't get. But either way, at least just understanding that limitation makes it that I can work with it, and we'll be able to find something. I might just have to also find something that fits with the biome and continent, just to make sure that we aren't running into too many variables that are just too different that we can't make them compatible. Let's see. So moving down here, and you can see again, this is that same path that we had before. We have another staff facility here. And again, this is really, really close to the main path. And we've decorated a fair amount of stuff, but you can see like up to only really about here, and then up to the keeper door on this side. So this is because this is the current part of the zoo that we're actively working on. So this is all going to get some sort of decoration. Same thing along this edge here. Here's our Aldabra, I was going to say Aldabra Galapagos, but that's not what it is. Our Aldabra giant tortoise here. And so what I wanted to do is I also wanted to make something kind of cute where the animals could get up on top of this, and if nothing else, just kind of hang out, and the guests can get a much closer view. I should probably, just from a realism perspective, probably put another like 1 meter little log here, and then maybe like a thin log on the side there, just to discourage guests from climbing in. So that might be a small addition that I do with these guys as well. I think they are about maxed on their coverage as well. And so I try, like, that's, I guess, you know, another goal is I'm trying to maximize the amount of coverage that all of these animals have, because when we take a look and we just zoom all the way out and we take a look at the zoo here, it looks a lot better when you don't see all of the paths running all over the place. And it just looks like a canopy of trees almost. There might be different varieties and different biomes and everything else, but there's still a canopy of trees that you can kind of see and work with, and maybe a handful of random rooftops and maybe some paths here or there, but it's still looking down on like a more forested area instead of just like an open, wide space. Now over here, because I can't put anything here, I couldn't really cover that up anymore, because otherwise I would have been more than happy to do that. But since we're at the edge of the map, we're a little bit more limited. All right, so let's get back over here. So again, this is another facility that I made probably a little overkill, because it really just has like a staff room, a keeper hut. The keeper hut is servicing this, and then also the snow leopards. But then we have on the backside here power and water, which again are generally out of the standard view of the guests. We put another pair of shops in here, and we have another pair of shops over here. So we're trying to get a lot more shops in. Most of these shops are relatively new, so that's part of why they haven't had as much of an effect on the guests' happiness yet. So we'll get there. And then this will look a lot better once it gets decorated. We'll probably put some vines and stuff, because even this building's looking a little dull compared to some of the other buildings that we have so far. There's no shop facades or signs or anything like that, but that's just because we haven't gotten quite complete with that. And then the last thing that I've recently, well, actually one of the two last things I recently built. So this pathway here comes up, and then let's go ahead and hit play just so we can get all the torches going. So the torches only render in when you're a certain distance away. So this path comes all the way back up to where our dingoes are here on the left, and then back up to kind of where our castle was. And it connects down to that whole section of stuff down there. And then the walls that are here is, this actually took quite a while to build, but this is just single brick by brick turned at a slight angle every time to create the path edge all the way along here. And I wanted to make sure that it was tall enough that, obviously guests wouldn't necessarily like fall over the edge, but not be feeling like you're walking through some sort of like literal prison type feel or whatever. So we have torchlight all the way up. The nice thing about the torchlight is it doesn't require power. So even if you don't have a power source anywhere, you don't have to worry about that. The other thing is a lot of the lights that you'll see that I've put in here have this like metal ring around it. It's really just a metal vase or pot that is in the game that I've sunk down far enough that you don't see that, and then it looks like the fire is coming out of some sort of like bowl or something. There's another bowl object that I've used in other places as well. I use both of them just kind of interchangeably, just depending on what I want to do with the building. And then this last one here, this is the exhibit building, and it did take some inspiration from some of the blueprints that they already have, where if we go here, and I think if we filter down to theme and India, yep, and then, you've got this building here, which, I mean, generally kind of the same thing, but I went ahead and I made it my own. I added a lot more layers to it, a lot more levels. It's definitely got a lot more light. And then the other thing is this because this whole thing was just like basically a roundabout or a circle. And so I wanted to kind of cover up the path edges here with something that kind of fit with this. Obviously don't have any exhibits in there yet, or exhibit animals, because I have the exhibits. And I also wanted to put down some light. Now, I know it's not really realistic to have fire this low to the ground where guests could, like, especially kids, could trip and fall into it. But there is a degree of realism, but I still wanted to do something that was kind of nice and unique for this particular structure. Same thing up here. We have some light. We have these custom built things, and we also have just actual like electric light there. And then we have this whole thing here with the chapel or steeple, I guess, kind of lit up with another one of those little fire things. I did take the roof and created my own kind of custom roof here. And you can see, like, when we go inside, the edges of this also have a lot of detail on it. And I did get some of the ideas from the template that the game already has, but ultimately this was still built by hand. And that is pretty much it so far with this zoo. So I really hope that you enjoyed the tour. I know it was kind of a long video, but I really wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to showcase some of the different techniques, showcase the different habitats and animals that we've got going on in here, the buildings, everything else. And as you saw, this took a fairly decent amount of time. And when somebody new comes into this stream, whether it be on Twitch or YouTube, and they want to see the entire zoo, I don't mind showing it to them, but going through that same process for everybody who comes in makes it that we're not really doing any building anymore, that we're doing a lot more just talking and exploring instead of creating. And so I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity where we can have the exploring kind of component, because that doesn't really change too much over time. And then we have the creative component that I want to make sure that we do on live streams. So the last little bit that I wanted to show you here is the viper snake, or the cobra snake, actually. I'm pretty sure this is Cobra. It's quite fitting for this channel. Yep, King Cobra. Which is actually one of the emotes that I have on Twitch. But I also, again, it comes back into the kind of the creativity that you can get into with the game here, where you have the two eyes that are there, and I just took the same torches that are here, because no matter what angle you angle the torch, the flame is still going to go up, which obviously makes sense because that's what happens in nature. I embedded them inside of the eyes, so it looks like the eyes have a, let's hit T here real quick so we can kind of zoom around this, that the eyes themselves are almost like on fire. But if we take away the head, you can see the two torches that are crisscrossed in there to make that work. Ultimately, it was more of just something fun to do. It wasn't necessarily required to do, but I also wanted to add something kind of decorative on top of this without necessarily copying what I did over here or even down here, even though I built this building before this one. But at any rate, like I said, I hope you guys really enjoyed this. If you do, please give a consideration to subscribing to the channel. Definitely add a like or dislike, whichever. Let me know if this is the kind of stuff you like to see or not. And even more so, please leave a comment and give me some details as to what you liked or didn't like. I would really appreciate that. I hope to see you guys in the next live stream. And until then, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.